Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7 on the 9th of March. Today I've got a special guest beg your pardon. My special guest this evening is Kate Monahan, Disability Rights Campaigner. Welcome back to the programme, Kate.
Hello. Hi. Nice to see you.
I hope you're seeing me all right, Kate.
Yeah.
Oh, beg your pardon. Maybe got a misprint. It's the 10th of March today. I apologise. We've got a misprint on the screen this
Okay,
morning.
doing the
Okay,
same.
Anyway, Kate, I'm going to get straight to, first of all, the coronavirus update. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,724,972 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,517,816 have been confirmed negative, 207,156 have tested positive. There are 691 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 20 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection now stands at 7,461. This number only includes those who have died following a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 582 were in hospital last night, 50 of whom were in intensive care. Now, as of 8 a.m. this morning, 1,789,377 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 132,760 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 127,987 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 190 since yesterday. And this number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. And now to this evening's main headlines. And in Holyrood, there has been a vote of no confidence in the Deputy First Minister. Beg your pardon, we have a National Records of Scotland update, I'm just being told. I almost forgot about it there. We have an update on the way things have panned out so far with COVID-19 from the National Records of Scotland. And as of the 7th of March, 9,725 deaths have been registered in Scotland where the coronavirus COVID-19 was mentioned in the death certificate, according to statistics published by the National Records of Scotland today. In the week to the 1st to the 7th of March, 141 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, a decrease of 89 deaths on the previous week. Over 80% of the deaths this week occurred in hospital, representing 119 deaths. 14 deaths occurred in care homes and 8 at home or in non-institutional settings. In the last 6 weeks, deaths in all locations have fallen. The fastest decrease has been in care homes, which now accounts for 10% of all COVID-19 deaths. Apart from 1 week in August, when there were only 2 deaths in total, this is the lowest proportion of deaths occurring in care homes since March 2020. Now on to tonight's main headlines. And of course, in Holyrood at the moment, there is an ongoing debate on a motion of no confidence in the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney. Now, the Scottish Parliament today, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, was the subject of a no-confidence motion before the debate moved on to the Hate Crime and Public Order Bill Stage 3 proceedings. That debate is continuing while we're on air, and although it's expected that John Swinney will survive the no-confidence motion and the Hate Crime Bill will be passed, we're not expecting the results before we go off air at 8 p.m. However, if they do come before then, we will bring them to you as they happen live. Now, Kate, first let me have a quick chat to you about this motion of no confidence in John Swinney. This seems like another desperate act by various unionist parties to try and salvage some kind of score on the SNP after the failure of them to try and pass a motion of no confidence in the First Minister. Do you think that the union parties are just becoming more and more desperate in their attempts to try and find some way to bring down the SNP's votes?
I mean, it certainly appears to be a very partisan, party political move. It doesn't seem to have weight or depth or much credibility as a in any real terms. So yes, I do think it is gamesmanship, which I guess is the business of politics, sadly, to a degree. I do think they failed to land any significant punches, as you say, on the party. And actually, I believe membership went up by about, I don't even know the numbers, but
I
about
think
12,000
I think
result.
10,000 was mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, 10,000. So that's quite, you would think that they may have learned from that and not proceeded today. But I don't think it has credibility. I don't think it's really even serious. It seems to be playing political games. And I think that turns off the general public and the wider voting electorate, personally. So I don't know what they hope to gain from it, but it does it does just sort of make parliamentary process seem a bit silly, if that
Yeah.
doesn't seem an awful word to use about it. Undermines the sort of I suppose the seriousness of our politics, of the weight of their duties in that chamber, and they're there to represent us and to talk about things that really do matter and change people's lives. And this sort of thing I find a bit pantomimey and sideshowing, quite reminiscent of Westminster sort of Punch and Judy politics, which I don't think is attractive to your average voter. But it's for
Yeah. I
them
think
to
it.
decide.
I think it. I think it's fair to say, Kate, that people are pretty fed up with, as you say, the sort of Punch and Judy politics of Westminster, and this looks like an attempt to sort of import that, doesn't it, into Holyrood, to try and turn the Holyrood Parliament into a sideshow as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we're going to sadly see more of that in the next 2 months, in the run up to the election, because I think this election is going to have more focus, more toxicity, probably, more vitriol than we've seen before, because, the union itself is riding on it. So they do have to find something to do to challenge the sort of dominance of the SNP in Scottish politics. And I'm not sure that they seem to want to make it a positive case for the union. There's not much evidence of that, and they certainly aren't doing that. And so this type of thing is, I suppose, the alternative way is to undermine credibility of even as far as the Scottish institutions of civic life. So yeah, I find it unappealing. I hope the public do as well and can see through it for what it is,
Well,
really.
let's hope so, Kate. We'll see how things pan out, hopefully later in the programme, if we hear any news from Holyrood. I'd like to move on to our second story now, and that is with regards to the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People. The Health Secretary, Jean Freeman, today announced that following a rigorous check and validation of remedial works, all remaining clinical services will now move to the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People from March the 22nd. Jean Freeman thanked all those involved for helping to deliver the project, including NHS Lothian staff, praising their dedication and their professionalism throughout the challenges presented by the pandemic. The Health Secretary said that the safety and well-being of patients has always been and will remain the top priority, citing that as the reason the decision to postpone the move of services until they could be delivered safely. Now, Kate, you and I all both know probably that this was another thing which the union parties attacked the SNP over. The delivery of this hospital particularly was dogged by problems early on, particularly to do with faults that were found in the fitting out. Now, it looks as though they've managed to fix all of those, and hopefully we should see this hospital now providing the full services it should have done from the beginning. Do you think now that the dark cloud that was sort of hovering over this project is now lifted?
I hope so. You won't be surprised to hear, as a sort of disability rights advocate, and particularly for children with additional support needs, that I totally welcome this news. It's wonderful, and to have such a fantastic resource for children with any kind of medical need is fabulous. As to the politics of it, I think it's easy to criticise these things, but I believe that it has come in on budget. I'm not sure. You'll probably clarify that.
Yeah.
And the Kingsbury Crossing came in under budget, probably the only infrastructure project in the UK to do so in recent times. And there have been lots of projects that have failed. Look at HS2, for example. Boris Johnson's own personal vanity projects, including the Garden Bridge, the Westminster kind of things that he's doing, and spending an awful lot of money creating a White House style comms room at the moment, and having his own flat redecorated. So I don't think realistically that they should be in the business now of undermining something that's just a fantastic resource for families in need and children that hopefully will now benefit from such a fabulous resource. So I welcome it being ready. I think it's great, especially given the year we've had with COVID, and good luck to them all. And I'm sure some of our families will be the beneficiaries, so that's wonderful.
So have you found that in your work as a children's disability rights campaigner that there have been problems, or have there been sort of queuing and problems of getting access to services caused by the delay in the opening of this hospital, or the reopening of this children's hospital?
Not specifically so much that. We tend to find that some of the fights that we're involved in that are to do with educational placements and sort of care, really social work type. And we've found that wherever the NHS has been involved, they've been mostly amazing, as you would expect to hear, and it's here, but it's just the same issues of resources everywhere. So if you can have, a specific resource like this one that's dedicated, you get the expertise, you draw staff who are specialists, and that type of thing, which will just add a greater degree of sort of comfort, and I'm sure will add in real terms to the experience of the patients that use this facility. But I wouldn't undermine the experiences of many of our children with medical issues in other NHS resources across the country, because we've got some really amazing people supporting them. So.
Yeah. So the NHS works with what it has, I guess. Anyway, let's move on to something completely different now, Kate. And this time it's to do with industry and firms fleeing to the EU amid Tory Brexit chaos. The United Kingdom government has come under further criticism over its devastating Brexit deal after the latest warning of a Brexit exodus of firms from the UK to the EU. A report conducted by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs showed that the number of Japanese firms to have left the UK in recent years, with the biggest drop occurring during the political turmoil following the Brexit referendum in 2016. The number of Japanese firms based in the UK had fallen by 12% between 2014 and 2019. In contrast, during the same period, the Netherlands saw an increase of 67%. Now, Kate, this is obvious really to anybody, isn't it, who's been watching Brexit? And I think we all were warning that this would happen, that companies based in Britain, which relied on Britain as being a threshold into the European market, if you like, are now being forced to abandon it and open premises and headquarters in the EU instead. Do you think, this isn't a surprise, is it? Were you shocked to hear that this was happening?
No, I mean, it's not my field of expertise, but it was entirely predictable, even as a layperson. That such a thing was going to happen when your main market is suddenly closed to you, whatever area of business that you're in, then inevitably your business is going to suffer. And yes, the increase, I was hearing an antiques importer interviewed on the radio, and they were saying that it takes them 4 days worth of paperwork to get one piece now from France into the UK. And just really little businesses that are run passionately by people who've dedicated themselves to building them up for decades sometimes, as well as big business. So I think we should remember that many businesses not just the big businesses, but SMEs and small independent companies that perhaps only employ a handful of people that are very threatened now, their fundamental survival. But it seemed entirely predictable, and I think, and I imagine we'll probably come on to it, but I think a lot of it is to do with the transparency, the capability of holding the government to account, the scrutiny of government at the moment. And obviously, the press plays a very large part in that in a democracy, or should do. So the conversations before Brexit happened were very narrow, and they were very fake, as it turned out. And I think that sort of undermining of our democratic kind of institutions and processes has been very damaging to public trust, and that's at the heart of it. And now many people's livelihoods are going to be lost. There's going to be a lot of anger, but nobody ever will take responsibility for it. They'll all just walk away. Is my personal opinion. But yeah.
Kate, I was just going to say, there's further information on this story. The SNP's international trade spokesman, Drew Hendry MP, said that the UK had benefited from a trading relationship with Japanese firms for many years, a relationship that's now been hampered by Brexit. He said that Scotland would not stand quietly by and let this happen, declaring that both votes SNP in the May election was the best way to protect the Scottish economy. Would you agree with Mr. Hendry that this is the best way to try and reverse this situation?
I mean, it seems to be, doesn't it? I mean, certainly as citizens, it seems to be our best route to regaining our European citizenship, which I personally would welcome. And I was opposed to Brexit, as many people in Scotland were. And that, again, feeling of a democratic deficit between what Scotland as a nation and its people voted for in regards to our relationship with Europe and what has actually happened to us with regard to our relationship with Europe. And the contrast, in particular with Northern Ireland, I think is quite painful, and businesses have been very adversely affected by that, obviously. So I hope that the SNP will do everything it's able to within its current sort of legal competence to mitigate the impacts on Scottish businesses if it can. And certainly I hope that Scottish independence, if and when it comes, and I hope that it does, that it will give an opportunity to restore our relationship with the biggest trading bloc that we have access to. And we can still have our direct international relationships with Japan and other countries, but we need Europe. And I think that if we can get back to a more direct relationship with Europe, that could be even more beneficial than we had previously, if possible, which would be a bonus, I suppose.
Well, talking of sort of importing and exporting things between countries actually brings us quite neatly to the next piece of news this evening, which is that the UK government is planning to improve transport connectivity inside the UK. Now, the UK government's plans to upgrade transport links between Scotland and Northern Ireland has been described as a systematic attack on Scottish Parliament's powers and a power grab that undermines devolution by Scotland's Transport Secretary, Michael Matheson. Westminster's Union Connectivity Review intends to look into the possibility of building a bridge or a tunnel between Scotland and Northern Ireland, and is expected to cost in the realm of £20 million should plans proceed. Despite transport being a devolved matter, Michael Matheson stated that the devolved governments had not been consulted on Westminster's plans. He further stated that the plans were not a priority for Scotland nor Northern Ireland, sharing that he had discussed the matter with Northern Ireland's Minister for Infrastructure, Nicola Mallon, who reiterated his stance. Other roads in Scotland, including the A82 and A96, have already been identified as requiring more investment, continued Mr Matheson, stating that London-based ministers were dictating what transport priorities should be in Scotland without irrespective of wider needs communities across Scotland have. Scottish Greens described Westminster's plans as a wrecking ball to Scottish devolution and voiced concerns over the plans impacting Scotland's climate targets. Experts have also warned against Boris Johnson's plans due to the weather concerns, meaning that a bridge would be more likely to close for a large proportion of the year. Now, you've probably heard this story, Kate, of Boris Johnson's plans to build a bridge or a tunnel between Northern Ireland and Scotland. But right from the beginning, this has met with derision, hasn't it? Because there are so many things against the idea of building a tunnel. For one thing, there's a massive United Kingdom's Ministry of Defence weapons dump, basically an enormous pile of unexploded ammunition and nerve toxins and all sorts of nasty stuff in an area called Beaufort Dyke, just off the coast of Scotland. So it's surely just a silly pipe dream. This can't be going to happen, surely.
I mean, the problem with having a prime minister like Boris Johnson is it is quite difficult to ever know if he's being serious. And given that he failed to build a bridge across the Thames, it's quite, it's quite hard to imagine him confidently achieving building one across the Irish Sea. So I'm not sure whether it's serious or not. I think it might be more political posturing. I think what you said earlier in those remarks about undermining devolved governments and imposing the will of Westminster and that type of thing might be more what we're actually seeing here
Yeah.
than any realistic plan to actually build a bridge or
Well,
a tunnel. As
there,
you say, with
yeah.
the environmental effects are just quite alarming, and
Well,
I
for one
hope
thing,
they
the
will.
roads in the southwestern part of Scotland are not really up to it as it is. But one of the things that struck me about this whole project was the fact that the British government had signed up to an agreement with the EU that they were going to check goods coming into and out of Northern Ireland before they come to or leave the United Kingdom. So somewhere in this tunnel, there's going to have to be an island off the coast of Ireland where things can be checked. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
It does, and I think it's one of those things where perhaps Boris is standing around saying, "Oh, just ring me if you have a problem having to produce if you're asked to produce paperwork." Perhaps everybody that ever ends up on such an island should do exactly that and call his bluff and get him to actually respond, because he said there would be no red tape and nobody would face those kinds of challenges. And it's hard to seriously address the things that he claims or states, actually, which is
Well, of
quite a
course,
sad state.
yeah. I was going to say, Kate, he recently has stated that the British government was going to delay making these planned customs checks that were actually due right now. And has said to the European Union they want more time to allow businesses in Northern Ireland to adjust. But they've had plenty of time, and the European Union is fed up with this, and they've decided already they're going to take action, some kind of legal action against the UK. Now that could take the form of all sorts of things. It could be trade sanctions for all we know. But whatever it is, Boris Johnson is at the root of it, isn't he?
Mm. Always, and I think it's quite disappointing that once again it's embarrassing internationally and certainly with Europe that we seem to think that it's somehow still credible in the modern world to take some posturing stance of dismissing the EU as if they're the people that are doing something terrible to us. This was our choice. It wasn't our choice, but it was UK voted for something that turned out not to be true and honest, but that's a different conversation. But they misrepresented what would happen, but they knew actually what would happen. And some sort of, if you establish a border, some sort of regulatory framework and bureaucratic procedure was always going to be essential to that. And it's, to the EU's credit that they've been this patient for this long, I think, and they could have been much tougher on the UK, and they could have insisted on many things, because actually what we voted for, in our hard Brexit, which it effectively is, we should actually have to now endure theoretically. And why should the EU make it easier for us?
Yeah.
I just feel we've put ourselves in this position. We've made our bed and we lie in it now, and
Do you,
it will be difficult, but
okay.
too bad.
Kate, I was just thinking there. Could it be? Do you think that because the Northern Irish Unionists, who, let's face it, have been caught in the middle of Brexit, really, they didn't want Northern Ireland to be treated differently from the rest of the UK, and perhaps the idea of this tunnel is to try and physically link up the United Kingdom so there isn't a sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Do you think this is maybe some kind of symbolic thing that Boris is trying to do to appease the Unionists, to make it look as if there is a fixed link between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK?
I mean, you may well be right, and there might be something emotional in that. But I think what's actually happening from the polling in Ireland is that what Brexit has in fact done is potentially unify Ireland, something that nobody else has been able to do through any process thus far. And the polling in Northern Ireland has never been so positive for the idea of a united Ireland and a united Ireland in Europe. So you're right, he has to start to find something to do to heal that if he wants to retain the union in that
Okay, well,
regard.
certainly Northern Ireland is, of course, certainly still effectively in the European Union, and Scotland isn't. So, I mean, the Unionists who said they didn't want to be treated any differently from the rest of the UK have ended up being treated exactly that way, completely differently from the rest of the UK, haven't they?
Which is one of the resentments in Scotland, and rightly so, because they actually got a better deal than we did, and why should that be so? In effect, as well, Scotland wasn't given preferential treatment or allowances made for our relationship to continue with Europe in the way that Northern Ireland actually was. So there's so many layers of it, of complexity. The Ireland problem is so difficult. It's so lengthy, it's so involved, and I just don't feel that the idea of a physical bridge, however symbolic, could actually heal and repair some of the damage that's been done through this kind of process and sort of posturing, I suppose.
Well, perhaps if they build a tunnel or a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland with a fixed link like this, then Scotland should claim that it's part of Northern Ireland and ask to be, brought into the customs union, the same as Northern Ireland. Or
I
would
mean, there's
independence just be simpler, Kate?
I think independence is coming potentially to both Ireland and Scotland, hopefully, and not least because of Brexit. Brexit seems to be one of the most important elements in the rise in support that the polls indicate for Scottish independence and in Ireland as well. So maybe both nations will gain their independence as a result of Brexit. So the whole thing will have come round in a circle, and it's a self-inflicted own goal for
Well, you
Boris
never
and the
know.
country.
You never know, Kate. Perhaps in a few years' time we might see that exact thing happening. Anyway, listen, we have to
Well,
move on. But still on the subject of roads, and four more A9 dualling schemes have now been given approval. Scottish ministers have given the go-ahead to completing statutory procedures on four more schemes on dualling the A9 Perth to Inverness Road. The work to prepare made orders for these four schemes, totalling over 35 kilometres, is well underway, with publication expected over the coming months. It's also expected that public local inquiry reports will be submitted to Scottish ministers for a further three schemes in the coming months. Subject to positive decisions from the public local inquiry process on these three schemes, this would pave the way for completing the statutory processes for approximately 92% of the programme. The design work for the remaining scheme between the Pass of Burnham and Tay Crossing is also continuing following the co-creative process with the local community. The four schemes are given the go-ahead to make orders are the Tay Crossing to Ballinluig, that's 8.2 kilometres, Pitlochry to Killiecrankie, 6.4 kilometres, Glengarry to Dalwhinnie, 9.5 kilometres, and from Dalwhinnie to Crewbinmore, 11 kilometres. So, Kate, despite what the British government is attempting to do in digging tunnels under the sea, the Scottish government seems to be doing the day job, as it always does, in actually delivering what we really need, which is a better road system to the north of Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, I live up in Aberdeenshire, so it's quite remote. And although it isn't very far at all to say Perth or up to Inverness, there's not much connectivity up here, as you'll know. So, the A9 is a dangerous road. It's the road on which there are serious accidents regularly. So you can only welcome this. I know there are always environmental impacts, and local communities often don't want big roads on their doorstep, etc. So there is a balance here, and I'm sure the Scottish Government have taken all of those issues into account. But broadly, I hope it makes a quite risky road much safer.
It's certainly a
And
busy road. I don't know about you, Kate, but I travel into and out of Perth on a regular basis as a kind of internal tourist. I feel like it's one of my favourite places. And to be fair, the road, yeah, it does. It alternates between dual carriageway and normal A roads, and it can be dangerous when people are not used to it. There is, as you say, an environmental impact to widening roads like this, but from my own experience of staying locally along the route of the road, that noise, the road noise, actually tends not to be such a big problem as long as the road is screened with trees. That sort of thing is very important, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, places like Dunkeld, that is a popular tourist destination, a beautiful
Yeah,
place to visit. It's not very far at all off that main road, and I think you're right. There are things that can be done that can mitigate that with trees, etc. And I think perhaps more wildlife bridges, which have been very successful in many countries to help species cross these busy roads, and that type of thing might be ways forward that we could minimise the impact on local wildlife and around as well. And the environmental issues around car travel, etc., remain and are a conversation that we all need to have in on this one planet that we occupy.
yeah.
So we take those on board as well, I suppose. But yeah, Inverness is the fastest growing city in the UK, and to have a dual carriageway all the way up to it is in many ways perhaps the future. And to have it more connected to the rest of Scotland, I think would be a positive thing in lots of other ways. But
In
maybe
terms of the sort of green industrialisation of the north of Scotland, how important is it, Kate, do you think, for connectivity to be improved? Because we will start to see huge developments in tidal energy in the Pentland Firth, for example, which is in the very far northeast of Scotland. It's going to be vital, isn't it, for road and rail links and air links to be established that make it easier for people to travel to work in these emerging industries.
absolutely. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, as you can imagine. It's quite a big industrial city, but very far removed from the central belt. It's not a very quick journey to get down to the central belt, even though it's not very far in miles. But it is looking to sort of diversify, and it's making a great deal of effort to become a global centre actually for renewable energy, as well as it remaining or trying attempting to remain the oil and gas capital of Europe outside, albeit outside, as we've just been discussing post Brexit. So I think there's all of that. There's a human need, human life, but we have to bear our responsibilities as custodians of the natural world as well. And I think people like David Attenborough have made wonderful kind of appeals to us to consider ourselves a species alongside other species. And we were talking about putting maybe tunnels under the sea, but the impact on marine life, etc., is known to be adverse. All of the disruption that would take to lay it down, etc. There's so
Yeah.
many species that that are impacted, especially by the MOD, who recently did a weekend of their whatever war games, and 3 whales that were in the lock that they tried to herd out before at
Yeah.
least 2 of them died. And so I think we have to be responsible in that way as well as citizens of the world. But I think we also have an economic need because we live in a capitalist economy and people need to work to sustain themselves. So the balances are nuanced, they're kind of complex. And I think we need to have conversations as citizens of Scotland, but as global citizens as well, as to how we go forward to maximise the opportunities economically, but retain our stewardship of the natural world as well, which
Do,
is
do,
one of Scotland's bonuses of the beautiful countryside, the tourism, the number of people that come up here to look at sort of wildlife from Europe is amazing. It is a beautiful space, and we need to protect that too. So,
do you think, Kate, that there's an argument during the duelling of roads like the A9 for the people who are planning these things to make sure that there are sufficient numbers of electric car charging stations, for example, because we talk about pollution coming from motoring. One of the ways, surely, that we could mitigate that would be to install thousands of charging points along these major routes to encourage people to use electric vehicles for these longer journeys.
absolutely, and there will be many initiatives. I was reading that in Switzerland, where they put up, I think there were plastic barriers along their one of their motorways because local residents found it noisy as a sound barrier, but it actually had the impact of decreasing pollution as well. So there
Uh-huh.
are, vertical gardens that can be grown up alongside major roads that carbon capture there at site. There's lots of initiatives, and I think some are really exciting. And one of the lowest cost carbon traps there is a tree. So
Yes,
we can
indeed.
all we can plant flowers, we can do our bit as well. And so I hope that as they plan the roads, they will future proof them in these ways and look ahead as far as possible. And as you say, things like electric recharging things, or hopefully maybe even we go beyond electric cars, and whether they're going to be water driven cars or not,
Yes,
etc. But
hydrogen
it,
seems to be the new fuel.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I think it's exciting to be able to do things that are positive for humans and every other species, if we can. And it
Well,
should be a priority.
let's hope that Scotland is at the cutting edge of this in the future. Anyway, we're going to change tack completely now and talk about what everyone else has been talking about, which is, of course, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And the Society of Editors are in turmoil over a statement that it made on Meghan. Over 160 journalists of colour and editors of The Guardian, Financial Times and Huffington Post have expressed anger over a statement made by the media industry body, the Society of Editors, claiming that racism was never a factor in media coverage of Meghan Markle. Ian Murray, the Society of Editors Executive Director, claimed that the Duchess of Sussex's claims of racism were not acceptable. Following the backlash, the Society of Editors called an emergency meeting to discuss releasing a new statement to address concerns. However, it's understood that the board was split on the wording of the statement. The division is believed to be regarding the wording of an apology, with some demanding a change in tone. The meeting came after 168 journalists of colour wrote an open letter to the Society of Editors expressing that a statement of evidence of an institution and an industry in denial. The Society of Editors did not respond to a request for comment. This follows the news that Piers Morgan has left his position at Good Morning Britain after the show received over 41,000 Ofcom complaints regarding his comments about Meghan Markle. Now this, Kate, obviously is a very sensitive subject. The subject of racism, particularly connected with the monarchy, has been incendiary, hasn't it? But to find that even the media is split over this is really quite amazing, especially considering that the tabloid media in particular has been extremely critical of Meghan Markle ever since she got involved with Harry.
Mm. I mean, there are so many layers to this, and so many issues that it raises about ourselves as a society, as our institutions like the monarchy, and in our democracy, a press, and how those things, intersect, I suppose. I mean, for me personally, I think the fact that the panel that made this judgment were all white, for example,
Yeah.
and could sit in judgment on what is and isn't racism without any diversity at all, and without any sense of that being inappropriate in the first place. And now they've had to publicly is quite telling. I think the publications that have challenged them are the ones that have always been balanced with regards to coverage, of Meghan Markle. And I think the tabloids remain in danger of having learned nothing from the Diana situation.
Yeah.
But it's indisputable that Meghan Markle has been the victim of a campaign of hate. It's there to see. I mean, there's a brilliant comparison online of the headlines between Kate and Meghan doing exactly the same thing. So, for example, there's a story where Kate Middleton's cradling her baby bump, and it's like, oh, not long to go now, Kate, the wonderful mummy, blah, blah. And Meghan Markle touching her pregnant tummy and them saying, oh, she's so, weird. Is this some ritualistic, and it's that type of sort of disparity in what is effectively the same subject. The now kind of almost comic discussion about avocados between the two, that Williams brought Kate an avocado when she was poorly because it made her feel less nauseous, and Meghan Markle eats an avocado and it causes drought in the third world. It's just it's there. You can see it for yourself. There is evidence, and so I don't see how any press governing body can potentially just make a statement like they did, and I'm not surprised they've had to dig themselves slightly out of their hole, if indeed that they have successfully done that. But I think the whole question of press accountability is one that we should be talking more about. The press is self-regulating, and I personally would argue that that's failing us as a democracy, because self-regulation is ineffective. People with an interest discuss and judge a matter in which they've got an interest. So how can it be a sort of robust and trustworthy process? And that type of thing has to change, really. I
You
think
mentioned
if we're going.
earlier on in our conversation, Kate, going back to the days of Princess Diana and the fact that the press didn't seem to have learned anything from that. I seem to recall at the time when Diana, just before Diana's death, in fact, where she was going out with Dodi Fayed, that there were quite unpleasant sort of racist rumours going around about the palace not accepting a dark-coloured child if Diana were to have a child with Dodi Al-Fayed. And then we come, right up to date now with Meghan Markle. And of course, since Brexit, the United Kingdom seems to have, or the United Kingdom press now seems to think that it's perfectly legitimate now to make what are veiled sort of racist statements. Do you think it's become more acceptable for the UK press now to indulge in this kind of latent racism?
I don't think it's acceptable. It's never been acceptable, but they do it. And so the real question is, what can we do about it? How can we as a society redress it? Because it's indefensible, and potentially maybe a hate crime bill, if we get one, might be something that we should apply to our press, because they stand behind a defense of freedom of speech, but you don't have a freedom to speak hate. It isn't something that in a civilized modern society we should have a press doing, to actually pursue somebody in this way, and in such a sort of the, the viciousness of it has been just shameful, and we shouldn't tolerate it as a society. It's just not acceptable for those kinds of racist comments to be made about somebody, anybody actually.
Mm.
But my heart went out to her. I don't. I felt like whatever Piers Morgan says about the veracity of her comments, I certainly could only partially imagine what it must have been like to be the subject of those stories.
Yeah.
And in Britain, you can only sue the press if you are the subject of a story. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. So the press can write whatever they like, but only you as the as the subject of a story can sue them if it's not true. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we should change. We should change it so that anybody can take them on if they've lied. And they shouldn't be allowed to lie. So we need more robust processes. And I think self-regulation is failing. And this group of this editorial group that have so blatantly misjudged the mood
Yeah.
should perhaps replaced by something more appropriate that is neutral, is diverse, is inclusive, and gets it right.
Well,
Because
let's
this is
hope so, Kate. It would be nice to think that as a result of all this, maybe something might change. Anyway, we have to move on, I'm afraid. And our next story takes us to Belarus and the Lukashenko gold mine. A film accusing the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, of spending hundreds of millions of dollars on gilded residences, planes and Rolls-Royce and Maybach motor cars has gained more than 3 million YouTube views since its release on Monday. The film, by the Polish-based opposition news service Nexta, was released as opposition activists gear up for a new round of protests against last year's re-election of Lukashenko, who has ruled for 27 years and calls himself the people's president. It echoes a video showing a palace alleged to be owned by Vladimir Putin, produced by allies of the jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, which fueled mass protests in Russia earlier this year. Now, Kate, you probably know a little bit about this story that the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, seems to be accumulating wealth at a dramatic rate, and to have this exposed in the media like this is something which, unfortunately, he can't control in other countries. The internet, I suppose he could shut it down, but the cat's out of the bag, really, isn't it? He's been found out.
I think it does link back to what we were just talking about, and I think that there's a danger that we're actually sliding in a not dissimilar direction. We've just had the Prime Minister found in court to once again, his government has been found in court to have misled and done inappropriate things. And who is holding him to account? Where is this robust fourth estate democratic press that holds the powerful to account? There's no evidence of them. The pandemic seems to have provided a massive windfall for all their friends and neighbours and anyone they've ever known to make millions of pounds
Yeah.
in for what, I don't know. And so I think we're in danger of sliding a little bit into that direction of the type of people that at one time in the world we would have been in a much, I suppose we would have challenged the legitimacy of such rule. But we've got a more and more openly corrupt system, and we don't seem to have any way to redress it. And I fear that we'll end up in the Prime Minister's just redecorating his flat at taxpayers' expense. Okay, it's not a golden palace yet, but it might be in 10 years. And who will stop him? Where are the voices of challenge? Where's the transparency and accountability here for public money and how it's being spent? And look at the whole Dido Harding Serco debacle and the amount of money that's been spent on really what seems to be a pretty ineffective test and trace system that is larger than the whole budget allocated to Scotland and would have
Yeah.
paid for the NHS pay rises. So
I saw that. I saw Dido Harding's Test and Trace app compared for price with two other projects across the globe, and it came out as the third most expensive infrastructure project on earth, not just in the UK. It was incredible.
I know, exactly. So I suppose I totally agree. And so the point that I'm trying to make, probably not very well, is that I'm not sure we have the moral high ground these days to judge other countries quite the way we seem to think that we should be able to. Obviously, no corruption is ever acceptable and should always, if possible, be stopped. And but we've got to model the type of nation that we want other nations to be if we're going to go out there in the world and police others.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, thank you, Kate. I'm going to have to stop you there and move on. And the next story, and that is action on rented homes. A new strategy for Scotland's rented sector sets out to improve accessibility, affordability and standards as part of a new 20-year route map for housing to be published next week. The rented sector strategy, which will be a key element of the Housing to 2040, is Scotland's first long-term housing plan, which will set the path for how homes and communities should look and feel in 2040. It will specifically address private and social rent and agricultural tenancies to ensure an affordable quality sector offering choice to meet people's needs. Tenants will be closely involved in the development of the strategy, with a national network of social rented tenants developed alongside a tenant participation panel. Housing to 2040 will also include a proposal for a new housing bill to be introduced early in the next Parliament in order to take forward further reforms in the rented sector and to increase the rights of tenants. Well, Kate, we've heard a lot in the last few weeks since, obviously, the pandemic has caused a lot of problems in the rental sector with people being unable to afford their rents. And of course, the Scottish Government has taken action to prevent tenants from being evicted, but that will eventually come to an end. It seems that there's a real need for a change in the rented sector. I think many people in rented accommodation are being forced out by things like Airbnb. How do you feel about this? Do you think that this goes far enough? Will this new scheme get rid of these problems? And do you think it will happen fast enough?
I mean, I have to say that I think having anybody homeless in what is the fifth richest economy in the world is actually a scandal. And it's something that we could change. And we did change it in the first week of COVID. Within a week or 2 weeks of COVID, there were no homeless people on the streets because they sorted it out and made it not happen because they thought it would add to the spread of the virus. So we can do it, and we can do it very quickly if there's political will. And I think it is a fundamental basic right to have shelter and safety and a roof over your head in a modern economy like ours.
Yeah.
I think we can afford to do it. We should change everything we can. And I think, the recent sort of investment and leaving empty properties of overseas landlords and is adding to it. I think there are a lot of, up here where I live, there are a lot of estates and they have empty properties. They just have, cottages that they just let go to rack and ruin. And, there's so many things we could address to give everybody a safe space. There's loads of initiatives in Europe with little pods and individual living. And there's so much innovation. We should embrace it. We should change as much as we can, as quickly as we can, get everybody off the streets and into a safe place, and support those that are in rented accommodation, whether it's private or otherwise, to stay there, especially at the moment. I mean, we can't tell people to stay at home and then they have no home.
Yeah. Well, listen, Kate, I'm afraid we have to move on. Time is short this evening. And to our next story. And £533 million has been paid to businesses since November. New figures show that more than £500 million in lifeline support has been paid to Scottish businesses affected by the pandemic since November 2020. The Strategic Framework Business Fund has paid out £214 million by 22nd of February, with approximately 89% of the support going to small and medium-sized businesses with a rateable value of less than £51,000. In addition, £218 million was paid out under the Hospitality Retail Leisure Top-Up Fund in the period to the 26th of February. The information has also been published showing payments across 9 sectoral themes, including the Wedding Sector Fund, which which was only available in Scotland. In total, businesses have received more than £533 million of grants since the introduction of the strategic framework on the 2nd of November. Kate, another good news story, isn't it? Scotland is helping people, helping businesses with more money than ever, it seems.
I mean, that has to be welcomed, doesn't it, in the midst of a pandemic like this, and for the amount of time that it's gone on for. And, the more we can do to support people to survive until it's safer, the better. If we can keep businesses just ticking over enough for people to sustain them, and especially small businesses, I think, that have less capacity perhaps to ride it out than a big business. And maybe that isn't always true. Because they also have a lower cost base, etc., less staff. So I'm not even sure that that's a right comment to make. Perhaps all businesses of all size need support, and it's just different support. So it's good to know that it's still going on, that there are these good news stories in amongst all the terrible COVID stories that we've been listening to. But I do think it's right for the government to prop the economy up so that people can stay at home, and let's get everybody safe and well, and then the businesses will be there to flourish again once that people are allowed to go back to some degree of normality, whatever that's going to look like if we get there again.
Let's hope that happens, Kate. I'm going to finish with our final story tonight, and safeguarding the flapper skate. The critically endangered flapper skate is to gain further protection following the urgent designation of a new marine protected area within the inner sound of Skye. The site will protect a nationally important flapper skate egg nursery area, which is the largest of its kind to be identified in Scotland. Management measures prohibiting a number of marine activities such as fishing, diving and construction within the site will initially last for a period of 12 months and will come into force on the 17th of March this year. If after this time a permanent protection is found to be necessary, then proposals will undergo a full stakeholder engagement process, public consultation and impact assessments. These areas not only protect the flapper skate, but also a wide variety of species and habitats, including other species like the minke whale, basking sharks and Risso's dolphins. Now, Kate, I know you mentioned to me that you love the wildlife in Scotland, but I have to say I'd never heard of the flapper skate before this evening. How about you?
No, I know what you mean, but it's still fantastic news. And I think the more we can do to protect all species, including the flapper skate, which I agree is not a high profile. But I mean, anybody that's been across on the ferries to the islands and seen a minke whale, or, we saw a massive basking shark go by, or being out on little boats with the dolphins, and it's extraordinary the marine wildlife that we have, and Skye is such a beautiful part of the world, and I mean, to me it's just irrational to trash our oceans, to allow them to be polluted, to not protect species. The diversity of life is what offers hope for the long term of the planet and the sustainability and the future. And they're potentially going to develop cancer treatment off some tiny little frog in the rainforest, and who knows? We can't just dismiss these kind of less cool or kind of, because we don't know about them.
Okay. Listen, Kate, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time this evening, but we are still waiting to hear the result of the vote in Holyrood. I don't think it's going to happen before we go off air. But unfortunately, we have run out of time. So it just remains for me to remind you that we are in the middle of a major crowdfunder at the moment. And if you want Broadcasting Scotland to be there making programmes throughout this vital year in Scotland's recent history, then you can do so by becoming a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland by following the instructions on your screen now. Anyway, that's about it from me this evening and from this edition of Scotland at 7. My thanks again to Kate Monahan, for our disability rights campaigner, for being our guest tonight. Thank you, Kate. And from all of us here at the studio this evening, a very good night to you.
Thank you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.